What I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about the federal infrastructure bill, and I'd like to cover, I think it's important that we know not just what it is, but what it's not. You know, the last couple of years, the federal government has sent a lot of money down to Mississippi, to all the states, to respond to COVID and to serve as kind of an economic stimulus, if you will, to respond to the effects of COVID. And so a lot of people got the wrong idea when this particular bill would be discussed, that this was going to be another economic stimulus package that would be sent to the state with an infrastructure focus, meaning that this was going to be, and the number that was always thrown out was $4.7 or $6 billion that would come to Mississippi, and that it would sit in an account at the Department of Finance and Administration, and the legislature would then be able to dole it out however they saw fit, like they did with the CARES Act, like they're doing with the ARPA money, provided it's within guidelines, auditor, and other economic stimulus programs that the federal government has had. And that's not what this is. First of all, for those of you that are familiar with how Congress works, and I do want to say you've got the staff, I know of Senator Hyde Smith here, and there may be other representatives of the other parts of our congressional delegation I haven't seen, but I spent a few years on Capitol Hill. Mississippi can be very proud of our delegation in Washington. All of the members that we have in the House and the Senate do a good job of working together, and I don't think that gets reported enough, but a lot of their success is because they have good people on their team. So I want to recognize them and thank them for what they do. That's the problem with me speaking. I'd do something like that and I've totally lost my train of thought of where I was. But talking about the money, let me get back to that. So it's not an economic stimulus bill. What Congress did in order to get the votes necessary to pass it is they created this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And in my opinion, it's nothing more than an omnibus bill that they put several different pieces of legislation and acts all under one umbrella to try to pass. The portion of it that deals with the Department of Transportation is where they reauthorized, which every 5 years has to happen, the Federal Highway Administration. And what happens with that, the last one was the FAST Act, where they authorize and appropriate funds to the Federal Highway Administration for the administering of their programs in all of the states and territories with their local partners around the country. So to give you something to compare with, the last 5-year act we had, Mississippi's portion of federal dollars was $2.6 billion. Now I'm rounding up a little bit on that. So you had a year of a continuing resolution where they couldn't agree on what to do, and then they finally passed this bill. And so the next 5 years, Mississippi, with regard to the Federal Highway Administration, will have $3.6 billion of federal money that we hope will be made available over the course of those 5 years. $300 million of the 3.6 is dedicated specifically to bridges. I think $40 million a year goes to that. $10 million a year will go to electric charging, vehicle charging stations. And then for whatever reason, only Congress would do this, they have money for ferry boats in the Highway Administration. But so you've got $3.3 billion that will be in the normal programs of federal highway. And what that means for our budget is we expect in the first year for that to equate to about $160 million in federal money that this time last year we weren't expecting. So that's where we are with that. So the need that we have right now is for folks to, one, understand, are we going to have more money to do more of what we're supposed to be doing? Yes. Is it this big pot of money that Santa Claus is bringing us that we're just going to be able to run around floating it out? That's not what it is. It's not the way it's going to work. And I think it's important for you to know how our contracts work, because it's surprised me how few in the legislature and others are unaware of that. So when the Transportation Commission lets a project, we work, or the staff does a very good job in working hand in hand with the Federal Highway Administration representatives here in Mississippi to be sure that where we're about to dedicate funds throughout the state, that the Federal Highway Administration, it meets their standards, it meets their guidelines, and they're going to sign off on the use of federal money in those projects. And so we work hand in glove with them in the design of all the projects and all the pre-construction area, and then try to get it let out to contract. 100% of those projects are paid for up front with state dollars. Then the Federal Highway Administration checks behind us, making sure that we've met all the right standards and we're following their guidelines and we're doing it appropriately. And then, for example, if it's a project where it's an 80-20 match with the federal government putting up 80% and the state doing 20, then when they're satisfied we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, they reimburse the state that 80%. So this $3.6 billion over 5 years not only is not this pot of money that we're going to have to do with what we want, but it's not even money that ever comes here until the project's done, the Federal Highway Administration is satisfied with the manner in which it's being done, and they will reimburse us after the state funds have gone out. The reason for the importance of that is because we have to be in a financially stable position to be able to cash flow all of that. And things like earmarks from the legislature, or if we were to move away as a department from focusing on data-driven type of projects, it would be have a very negative impact for all of you, and certainly for us in the state as a whole. But the good news is it is more money, and we will be able to do a better job of carrying out the mission that the Department of Transportation has been charged with. But let me get to the challenges that we have as your department with that, with regard to that. So there's two that I would mention. One's not going to surprise you because it's something that all of you probably struggle with as well, and that's funding. We're a federal, we are a special fund agency. We're funded primarily through the fuel tax. Over half of our budget comes from the Federal Highway Administration. The rest is generated from the local fuel tax that we generate here. There is some money that comes from various other fees and taxes we may collect. Relatively speaking, that's a nominal number. The legislature has recognized the funding problems that the department has, and through a couple of programs they've done, one you're probably familiar with, the Emergency Road and Bridge Program, Repair Program, where they dedicate funds to try to help local governments around, but MDOT gets a portion of that money, normally around 30%, I think, to use on your state system. And also the lottery money, the first $80 million of the lottery, we received that. The commission in its wisdom chose to primarily devote nearly 100% of the lottery funds that we get to two-lane highways. Because when you look at the way the Federal Highway Administration allows for funds to be dispersed, and you look at the need we have and where we are financially, which I'll give you some stats on that, a lot of times the two-lane highways were getting left out or put at the bottom of the list. So this was a way for us to effectively address the needs that we had on two-lane highways. And it's been a wonderful program that's been a lot of help for us. But when you look overall at what we do and our need for additional revenue, we run at about a $400 million a year gap in rehabilitation needs around the state. When you look at bridges on the state system, we run at about a $50 million a year gap. That's annually. In what we need to address. To tell you an example of how much materials are and how much it costs more to do work, I'm talking about a $50 million a year gap annually on bridges. Only 2% of the bridges on your state system are classified as poor. But that's where our funding is at this point. The capacity projects around the state, where you have situations where a roadway or something, the route can no longer handle the volume of traffic, and so the data-driven criteria that sets out that you look at to determine if something else is needed, whether it's adding of lanes or a bypass or what have you, Those projects that have met that criteria and that are on the list represent anywhere between $4.5 to $5 billion worth of projects that for 10 years have been basically sitting on a shelf waiting for the funds to be able to use. So the good news is with this extra funds that we're getting with the infrastructure, I do believe the commission will be able to start something that for the most part they've not participated in 10 years. There's a few exceptions, and that's being able to focus again on building some of these capacity projects and things like that. So we have been in great conversations with the legislative leadership about these needs. I think that, one, they've shown that they recognize the need by virtue of what they've done with the Emergency Road and Bridge Program and the lottery funds. But they know that while that's come a long way, we've still got a long ways to go. So I'm thankful for the partnership that we have with them and working with us and coming up with new ways of trying to fund your transportation system. Everybody always wants to bring up the fuel tax, but I'm of the opinion that the fuel tax is not a sustainable stream of revenue for us just due to the nature of where we're going as a nation. When you look at the growth of electric vehicles or the use of electric vehicles, and you look at what a lot of the motor companies are doing, you look at the federal government moving the federal fleet, big portions of them over, when you look at them incentivizing the purchasing of electric vehicles by sending monies to the state in order to put up the charging stations so people don't have the anxiety of wondering whether or not they're going to be able to keep a charge to get where they're going. I see that as a move of the future. And so even if the fuel tax was raised, I believe it will become over time less and less reliable in being the sole source of funding for the transportation system. Now, the good news is we've identified the problem. The bad news is I don't have a solution for you. But we're in conversations with the legislative leadership about talking about that. And so far, they've shown a great interest in working with us to add the tools necessary to our toolbox so we can better close those gaps I was mentioning and get back to the business of improving our roadways to handle better capacity around the state. But as important as funding is, that's not our biggest challenge. Our number one challenge at the department, without a question, is staffing. When I worked, and as the mayor mentioned, I worked for Dick Hall when he was first appointed commissioner back 20-something years ago. And at that time, the commission had not been run off the 10th floor. They were still located on the 10th floor with us. And most of the people around there that were executive director, chief engineer, assistant chief engineer, the individual that ran intermodal planning or business administration, the average tenure was probably somewhere between 30 and 35 years. When you looked at the district engineers and the division heads, frankly, if you looked around most of the engineers in general, you had a lot of very seasoned people that had been there for a long time, had a lot of institutional knowledge, and had had true careers in the Department of Transportation. Ken Warren was the executive director when I went to work there. He came right out of Mississippi State as an intern with the Department of Transportation and moved all the way up to being executive director and retired with somewhere between 40 to 50 years. I forget exactly what it was. Today, if you were to do that same poll around, I think I can safely tell you that the average tenure is probably somewhere between 15 and 20. We've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. And our ability to not just retain capable staff, but then to recruit staff into vacant positions. The pay is so off when you compare it to the private sector. And I'm not one of these that believe you have to compare government always to the private sector, but when you compare it to the surrounding states' DOTs, when you compare it to what the Federal Highway Administration pays their staff here in Mississippi, it's a huge gap. And we've lost a lot of people and continue to lose a lot of people because of their need to provide for their family and to live the American dream and to have to go to where you can get a paycheck. Kind of like my grandfather told me when I graduated high school, my grandmother kept telling me, you do what makes you happy, money's not everything. And as soon as she left and got out of earshot, Papa looked at me and said, no, you know your grandmother's right, money may not make you happy, but the lack of it will damn sure make you miserable. So you better find something that you can make a living at and pay your bills. So we lose a lot of our engineers in their desire to provide for their family and having to go elsewhere to do it, not because they want to, because they love the familial relationship and atmosphere around the department. It's one of the best places, I think, in the world to work, but they have to make ends meet. And then when you look at our maintenance workers, the frontline workers, I see Mayor Hughes in the back. When a hurricane comes to the coast, the first people that are out there clearing the roadway so the ambulances and fire trucks and police trucks can get through is MDOT and the local public works people. When tornadoes come through the state, any other type of disaster like that, it's these folks that are out there away from their family in bad weather, cutting trees off roads, pushing things out of the way, doing all of the things necessary to keep the roads open so the emergency management people can get through. Starting pay for those positions is $18,000. 20 years ago, you would go to a service awards where you give everybody that's been there on 5-year increments, you know, you've been here 5 years, here's a pin, 10 years, 15, 20. 20 years ago, I would go to those with Commissioner Hall. The individuals coming up to get their 5-year pin, for the most part, looked like they had been out of school for 5 years. When I did the first one of those as executive director this trip around, most of the people that were getting it had more gray hair than I've got, which, as I pointed out today, everybody's got more hair than I've got, but they had gray hair. They're old people, and they were there for the benefits, not the money. And so we've got to work with our legislative leadership and being able to get wages up to where we can hire a staff that's capable of doing the job. To give you a couple more things and then I'll hush up. When the 87 4-lane program was passed, most of the pre-construction work then was done in-house because we had the engineers and staff inside that could do that. If the legislature passed a program like that now, we wouldn't be able to do that without consultants. And what we're paying consultants compared to what the job would cost in-house is about a 3-to-1 cost. So the money wouldn't go nearly as far either. So it's going to take a few years to correct that, and I'm happy to report to you that the legislative leadership seems to have recognized that and are working with us to adopt a plan that I hope will better equip our team, or better equip us to build the team to better serve you. Now here's the thing I know that most of you are interested in, is what does infrastructure money mean for local government? How much money will you get? I don't know. We're still waiting on the guidelines. Our programs manager, I think, is like a kid at Christmas. He runs in and checks his email every morning like he's waking up in the night to see if Santa's brought the presents. Yet we think that this coming in February. I believe that it's reasonable, and you correct me if I say this wrong, but I think it's reasonable and logical to believe that since we're going to have more money with $160 million, that the money that will be used through the various LPA projects will increase. But I just don't know how much, and I don't know how it's going to be spent. But I was talking with Sherry, and we will happy to come back anytime and do a webinar, whatever necessary, to be able to go through those to give you more concrete, reliable information as to what that looks like. Last thing, I want to take a point of personal privilege, and I want to recognize somebody that I think has worked with most everybody in this room, and that's Jeff Altman. Jeff served as the interim director. He was at the Department of Transportation when I came in 20 years ago, one of the finest Christian men I know. I would not have been able to have done this job the last 7 months if he wouldn't have been there as a more than just a right hand. He's made the decision to retire at the end of the month, and will be going on to bigger and better things. But I would like to take a moment for all of you to thank him for the work he's done to each of the local governments around for us. Jeff, would you stand up? Well, that's all I have. Did I cover everything, or did I leave anything out? All right, well, thank you for what you do. You know, y'all have got the toughest job in politics because all the people you represent know where you live. They don't know how to find a lieutenant governor or people like that, but they know where you live. So we appreciate what you do, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.